As time goes on, it feels like more revivals are being announced every other week. While revivals have always been a thing, as I grew up with my fair share of them, they were never as frequent as they seem to be nowadays. When a show is revived, it can be for several reasons. The studio wants to bank on people's nostalgia while also reeling in a brand new audience, the creator wants to continue their story as they have new ones they want to tell, or said creator pitches a revival due to no one being interested in their original ideas. More on that part in a bit. While I know many people groan over the concept of a show getting a revival, I try to keep an open mind as there have been good revivals such as Fiona and Cake, the various Ben 10 sequel series, and yes, even The Legend of Korra. Seriously, the show gets way too much hate. Though to be clear, a revival is continuing the story, be it a sequel series or a spin-off centered around a character from the show. So while series such as Ben 10 Alien Force and Fiona and Cake are revivals, DuckTales 2017 is a reboot as it isn't a continuation of the 1987 series. But in any case, the sheer amount of revivals that have been getting greenlit these past few years has been concerning, as it has made me think about what it says in regards to the state of the industry, along with why we, the audience, are obsessed with revivals. Joining me in this discussion is fellow YouTuber Fionapollo.
Hello! This is Fionapollo, and I've been asked by PedantiCat to swing by to give my own 2 cents as well. I have a funny relationship with revivals, as like previously mentioned, they can be made for a plethora of reasons. Some other ones can include being a guaranteed revenue to fund passion projects, or a way to explore a potential new story while utilising existing, familiar characters within the current anti-originality landscape we find ourselves in. Revivals currently don't have the best track record, but they can be done well, and they can sometimes serve an important purpose. This will be an interesting thing to look into for sure.
Right now, studios are taking fewer risks on original IPs as they want to ensure that whatever project they greenlight will be a success. The biggest example of this was what happened with Craig McCracken, creator of the Powerpuff Girls and Wander Over Yonder. After Kid Cosmic was greenlit by Netflix, which is a criminally underrated show of his by the way, he pitched them 16 other original ideas only for Netflix to reject all of them. This right here is the reason why we're getting revivals for Foster Home for Imaginary Friends and the Powerpuff Girls, as Netflix just wasn't willing to take any more risks at the time. Cartoon Network in particular has been very revival focused these past few years between Gumball Season 7, the newly announced Steven Universe spin-off Laws of the Stars, the Fiona and Cake spin-off, and the upcoming regular show revival. The last time we got an original animated series for Cartoon Network was The Fungies back in August of 2020. And even then, it didn't air on Cartoon Network until a year later as it was made specifically for HBO Max. And if you're currently asking yourself, what are The Fungies? You can blame that on poor promotion, along with the fact that it was one of the many shows that got removed from HBO Max and digital platforms back in 2022. The fact that Cartoon Network hasn't produced an original animated series in over 5 years says a lot about how the higher ups are afraid of taking risks on an original IP, with it also being disappointing as they used to take risks. And while Disney hasn't been as bad as Cartoon Network, as we've still gotten plenty of new original series from them, they've also been on a revival train with series such as The Proud Family and Phineas and Ferb. There have even been rumors about a Kim Possible revival, and it was revealed through leaked sources that a Recess revival was in the works before seemingly being canned. In contrast to Cartoon Network and Disney, Nickelodeon hasn't been as revival crazy. There was that time near the end of the 2010s when we got a few revival specials of Invader Zim, Rocko's Modern Life, and Hey Arnold, yet this surprisingly didn't result in them coming back for a new season. The only animated revivals we've gotten from them in the 2020s have been Fairly Odd Parents: A New Wish, which is currently in a weird limbo state after its first season, and the upcoming Avatar series, Seven Havens. Though I guess when your network is largely carried by SpongeBob, you don't need to rely on revivals as much.
The dynamic surrounding revivals is an interesting one, and I feel like at this current moment in time, the saturation of them causes people's perspectives to become a bit skewed. But like most media, their presence can serve as a pretty enlightening insight into the past and present of media trends and why they manifest the way that they do. People don't just clamour for revival after revival of massively beloved media properties overnight. We need to remember that the rise of this current trend is the result of years, even decades of build-up. Firstly, we need to recognise that we ourselves spurred this on as the audience long before it became a mainstream phenomenon. We didn't start out demanding TV revivals of our favourite cartoons, no, we wanted those stories to expand from their earlier iterations first, and this is where I want to take a brief look at sequels. The trend of sequels, as far as I can discern, goes back a fairly long way, starting out not in moving pictures but in books. Think Lord of the Rings following the success of The Hobbit, and even that's a fairly recent example. It's nothing new, really. When you read, hear, or watch a truly thrilling tale, sometimes only experiencing it once isn't enough, and that was especially the case back in the day before we were essentially spoiled for choice. So many authors would create entire anthologies of tales, involving the same core characters striding ever onward through various scenarios, environments, and predicaments that can range from being adjacent, parallel, or even completely removed from the original setting. This trend continued on in the form of movies, though in the beginning when Hollywood and movies in general was still a new concept, reenacting an entire book series was considered quite the ambition, let alone an expensive undertaking. So many just opted to recreate one or two and see how things go from there. Hell, I bet many of you watching don't even realise that The Wizard of Oz is one story of many regarding the world of Oz. I know I didn't until not long ago. There were also a great many movies that were adapted from theatre or the stage, such as musicals or even Shakespeare plays, which also helps to bolster this trend of reviving properties that came from a different media or art form or era. You may not necessarily view it as a revival in the sense we are currently thinking of, but it did spur on a renewed sense of interest in these original mediums, so I personally think it counts. This has gone on in the context of written media and even the theatre for centuries at this point, but in terms of cinema and TV, I think what really kicked things into overdrive is when we arrive in the 1980s, where sequels and revivals alike really started to take off, pop culture was booming, and movies became the reigning pastime of the youth. People became so enraptured with epic stories of their favourite characters on the big screen that they couldn't get enough, and a strong, economically prosperous response didn't exactly make sequels any less of a temptation to the Hollywood studios searching for more stories to spin and more cash to grab, so they began to experiment and see how far they could go with it. Some key influences to this trend include, but were not limited to, movies from the action, crime, or horror genres that all utilised a very formulaic narrative. Hero, villain, conflict, resolution. And people ate it up, like really ate it up. Franchises like Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, Star Wars, Scream, and even comic franchises like Marvel became massive global sensations that could reliably continue pumping out new stories for people to obsess over. And some dedicated fans still obsess even well into the 2020s. Really makes you think, doesn't it?
Now, one thing that is worth noting is that most of the revivals in the past decade are of shows that wrap things up so perfectly that I feel like they didn't need a continuation. So the fact that those specific shows get revived does frustrate me on some level, as other shows would benefit more from being revived due to ending on cliffhangers and unresolved plot threads, but aren't popular enough to be brought back. That isn't to say that shows with satisfying endings can't make a strong comeback, but I believe they need to shift the status quo in some way or have something new to say so that it feels owned. Fiona and Cake are a great example of this. I'll admit, when this series was announced, I did raise an eyebrow. While the Fiona and Cake episodes were fun, I didn't see how making this into a series could offer anything new to the table that the main series didn't already offer. Yet I ended up being pleasantly surprised, as it was a very poignant series that explored Simon's grief over losing Betty and feeling lost in the land of Ood due to no longer being the Ice King, with it also incorporating Fiona and Cake in a creative way that ties into Simon's story. But then you got Phineas and Ferb, a revival that I feel was unnecessary. While there is still some enjoyment to be had, and it does do some new stuff, such as taking place a year after the original summer, along with utilizing the fact that Stacey knows Perry is a secret agent, the show still feels fundamentally the same. Phineas and Ferb build a crazy invention, Candace tries to bust them but fails, and Perry stops Ruth from taking over the tri-state area. This is a revival that simultaneously shakes things up but also stays stagnant, with the biggest example being how Doof is now a villain again. The original series finale ended with Doofenshmirtz giving up villainy due to Vanessa saying she was going to move out due to wanting to intern at Alka but couldn't so long as she lived with one of their enemies, along with making him realize he isn't as evil as he pretends to be. We would later see Doofenshmirtz's misadventures of being a good guy in Milo Murphy Law, with it being revealed that he would invent time travel and become Professor Time. But despite all of that, the revival just has it in which Doof is now evil again with no proper explanation at all, and Vanessa isn't even intoning at Alka. I can't help but suspect that the reason why Doof was made evil again was due to being more marketable as a villain, along with not needing to shake up the formula of the series too much. But it feels like a disservice to undermine major character growth and not bother to explain his character regression in the show. The fact that Doof's decision to become evil again had to be explained by the creators rather than the show itself only further proved my point. And while I fully recognize that this show isn't to blame at all, it does make me all the more salty that this series get to make a comeback, but not other Disney shows that got screwed over, such as The Owl House and The Ghost and Molly McGee. Though even with everything I've said so far, a show with an unsatisfying ending getting revived doesn't guarantee it to be good, as seen with Samurai Jack. Fans waited over 15 years to get a proper conclusion, as for a while we had to make do with the ending we got in the IDW Samurai Jack comics. Yet when the show ended, I found myself wishing they had just stuck with the comics, as while the final season started strong, the quality went downhill at the halfway mark due to an unnecessary romance, with the finale itself being incredibly underwhelming. It was so underwhelming that they legit made a whole video game in order to provide fans with a more satisfying ending. Young Justice is another prominent example of this, as when the show was cancelled after season 2, many fans, such as myself, clamored for more of the series. Yet when it was finally brought back with 2 more seasons, a lot of us were underwhelmed with it. The show may have been darker and even more mature, but it continued the problems that boggled down season 2, such as juggling too many new characters without taking time to flesh them out, along with having people rely on supplemental material to fill in the blanks for all the time skips they did. It says a lot how when the series first ended prematurely, there was this huge push for more of the show for nearly a decade. But when the show ended at season 4, with the chances of season 5 being in limbo, people just moved on due to the show just not being as good anymore. The hot take, I think Young Justice is overrated and it peaked with season 1. But then we have revivals that can breathe new life into a franchise and redeem its reputation, like with Fairly Odd Parents: A New Wish. While the original Fairly Odd Parents was widely beloved due to being a witty and charming series, it became the punching bag of the animation community as time went on due to its decline in quality, with it not even getting any fanfare from Nickelodeon when it finally ended. But in came A New Wish, a revival that recaptured the magic of the original series while also putting a fresh new spin on things. Timmy was replaced with a brand new character by the name of Hazel, who was a more precocious yet still excitable character, along with having Cosmo and Wanda be a happily married couple like they were in the early seasons. It goes to show how even if something ends on a terrible note, a revival, if handled right, can redeem its legacy. It's part of the reason why I'm somewhat open to the idea of Darren Nessie wanting to revive Saw vs. the Forces of Evil, as despite my many, and I mean many, issues with that show, it could potentially fix the mistakes it made in its final 2 seasons.
I'll be honest, I think the context behind why certain shows are getting revivals involves a whole cocktail of different factors. But the 2 biggest potential reasons I want to look into are the economic issues plaguing animation and Hollywood in general, as well as the expansion and mainstreamification of fandom culture. I've spoken at length in my own videos about how animation is not doing so hot at the minute. Essentially, animation is one of the most expensive mediums to put onto a screen. Not only that, but despite the strides made towards respecting animation as a medium that any age group can enjoy, there is still a big misconception that animation is a medium only for children and isn't given its dues. Often to the point where in situations like award shows, for example, animation only has 1 or 2 categories rather than having multiple. This often leads to people higher up on the food chain not recognizing its importance and opting to prioritize live action productions with big name actors and actresses, which coincidentally is also the reason that a lot of animated films seek out celebrities for their voice actors, as that means they will be given more budget to work with and satisfy the bigwigs with a guaranteed return, since people are more likely to watch something with their favorite actor attached to the property. It sucks, a lot, but that's often how things roll in business, sadly. The second factor regarding fandom influence is a bit more more complex, but personally I believe it boils down to this. Back in the day when Hollywood was a lot more rigid about where it got its ideas from and fans didn't have as much sway in terms of public online feedback, people in fandom communities would often pitch their own ideas to each other about various situations, backstories, and anecdotes about the setting or characters that may not necessarily have been the focal point of the original story. This gets to a point where a lot of characters in popular media will have a canon persona, which is the quote official version, and a fanon version that will have attributes or qualities attached to them that are undisclosed or unknown in canon, but fans have chosen to collectively agree on. Eventually, many people within these fandom spaces ended up getting jobs within the field of media and could use their experiences of analysing other potential aspects of the original story to pitch their own ideas. And with how much more closely certain companies began to monitor the reactions and activity of fans surrounding their media properties, and especially when noticing that collective opinions of certain things were making waves in the face of public opinion and reactions to certain choices, companies would play into these ideas a lot more readily if they believed it would entice fans to watch their product. And despite the heavy saturation right now, it did work. People are at the least intrigued by the Fiona and Cake and Phineas and Ferb revivals and want to see how they turn out because they still care about these properties, regardless of whether the sheer amount of revivals being made is teetering on the excessive. Studios are only really about 10 years behind what the general public actually wants, so when you think about it, they're only really giving us what we asked for, but they're doing it similarly to how your grandma wants to serve you a dish she knows you like by piling a mountain onto your plate even though you're probably stuffed after like a quarter of it. There's an issue of excess that needs to be met with a certain sense of restraint that just isn't being properly exercised at the moment in time by these companies, and it really needs to be before that plate starts spilling all over the floor.
Regardless of the quality, all these recent revivals have also made me ponder about if people are trapped in the past by nostalgia. For example, even after almost 20 years, people to this day still want a revival of Spectacular Spider-Man due to it never being able to finish telling its story due to legal nonsense. It also didn't help matters that until Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the Spider-Man shows that came out afterwards were a massive downgrade. But it's also this clinging to the past that can make some people reluctant to give newer incarnations a chance due to just wanting the old thing back. While I have gripes with My Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, it is the best Spider-Man cartoon we've had since Spectacular, as it isn't the weird fourth wall breaking comedy of Ultimate or the mediocre storytelling of Spider-Man 17. But because it isn't Spectacular, I know some folks still reject the series as they just want Spectacular back because they want that closure and love the show that much. This also happened with X-Men 97 to a certain degree. Due to the show completely knocking it out of the park, with many seeing that it retained the elements of what made the original so great but was now accompanied by gorgeous animation, people clamored for all the 90s Marvel shows to be brought back so that they could get the same glow up. Spider-Man the Animated Series was the one that I saw people clamor for the most, as that's another Spider-Man show people have been wanting to see come back due to its cliffhanger. Yet as appealing as all of this is, and I wouldn't be opposed to it, I ask the question if we need it, as I wouldn't mind a new take on these characters and universe. I'd be a hypocrite to say that there aren't plenty of series I would want to see come back, but I also want to see new original stuff from these studios again. Revivals themselves aren't bad, as it depends on a variety of factors, but I believe that studios need to be willing to take more risks on original IPs, as they seem to ignore the fact that all those popular IPs they love bringing back were once risky original ideas. But how do you feel about all these revivals we've been getting? Which revivals have you enjoyed, and which ones do you think were unnecessary? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to be notified when I make a new video. And special thanks to Fionapollo for joining me for this collaboration.
Thanks for having me. It was a really interesting topic to delve into, and I'm glad I got the chance to give some of my own little insights. Like Pedanti said, if you're interested in more of what we do, consider checking out both of our channels and letting us know what else you'd like to hear about.
Until next time, catch you later.